Hello my nakamatachi, this is JoyGirl, and in honor of this week's chapter title, I would like to play a little game which I'd like to call 2 peas in 1 piece. At the top of your screen is a similarity counter, and throughout the review, I'll be counting the number of duo similarities which I personally found in chapter 1023. So come along for the ride, and at the end of the video, feel free to leave a comment on the number of similarities you spotted. There's no right or wrong way to do this, just simply articulate as many similarities of pairs that this title of 2 peas in a pod could be in reference to. There is a lot to talk about in this chapter, which will require an extensive discussion, so I'm hoping that this little game will increase the fun for you guys. But speaking of fun, let's also take some time to congratulate our winners for this week's Joy Fleet art competition. And the theme of this week was to incorporate a pineapple in honor of last chapter's MVP. So in third place we have Yamato, the best nakama, with a drawing of Kaido holding Yamato, holding a pineapple. This father-son drawing has quite a beautiful dreamlike sentiment to it, and who knew Kaido could have such a wholesome image supporting his child. In second place, M with a drawing of Kizaru holding a pen and a pineapple. A pen and a pineapple, an apple pen drawn by M. And in first place with the highest number of votes, we have Gyatsuki, with a very fitting modern representation of Yamato. Despite being in chains, Gyatsuki has managed to capture Yamato's fierce and rebellious personality through everything from pose, facial expressions, and coloring. And what a hip Yamato this is. A big congratulations to our winners, and a huge thank you to everyone for participating. They were seriously all so great, and you can see all of this week's submissions at the end of the video. But let's now get to the review. Starting with the weekly disclaimer, this is the best chapter of Wano so far. This chapter is packed. Despite being only 14 pages of actual chapter content, chapter 1023 felt much longer than the page numbers it presents. Oda's ability to pack so much of what makes One Piece great is ever so evident in this chapter. If Wano isn't already the best arc for you, this single chapter alone will surely change your mind, because it encapsulates everything we love about One Piece. The payoff of hype and the extensive world building really makes your investment into the series truly worthwhile. In this review, we're going to discuss chapter 1023 pair by pair, and it's appropriate to begin with one of the most shocking and hype reveals of the chapter. Firstly, we have to acknowledge another great foreshadowing moment from Oda, having hinted at the appearance of a certain Peach Dragon all the way back in chapter 310, and the reveal of Momo's adult dragon form in this chapter paid off. The build-up of the Heart Pirates mistaking Momo for Kaido, setting us up for this epic form, one that we have to say really do make them seem like 2 peas in a pod. The moment where Momo is standing in front of Luffy has a very climactic feel. I love the panel where we see Momo's dragon form and Luffy facing each other, and the callback to Punk Hazard to really hammer in Momo's growth. His threatening words back then were empty and hollow, whereas now in contrast, those words are unnecessary. His dragon form speaks for itself. This is a dragon fully capable of devouring. It really shows how far the character and we as readers have come since Punk Hazard and witnessed this journey of Momo maturing. He has stepped up to becoming the leader Wano needs. Now he's capable of fulfilling his mother's words quite literally and hold up the nation of Wano upon his shoulders. Obviously, Momo isn't the only one who matured since then. The growth and maturity for Luffy is also explicit. I really like the panel showing the flashback of the duo to contrast where we are now. Back then, seeing Momo in his small dragon form, Luffy was hunched over, not taking the little dragon seriously. Now, Luffy stands tall, looking at the adult Momo as equals. In Punk Hazard, Luffy was new to the new world, not having yet fully tested what he learnt during the time skip. Here, his torn and tattered cloak show he is battle tested, a warrior with new world experience. One of the callbacks I really look forward to in this series is when Kaido held Momonosuke on the roof, which became the cause of Momonosuke's acrophobia. Kaido at this moment saw Momonosuke as worthless, not worthy of killing, and this is a moment I've always believed will have a huge payoff later in the story, and after this chapter, it's now looking soon upon us, and I cannot wait to witness it. I love the decision by Oda not to show Momonosuke's human form. Shinobu's crying response was a great way to ground us emotionally in this segment with some heartfelt moments while still hyping us up for what's to come, because her words heavily suggest that adult Momo is a spitting image of someone very familiar to her, and this is obviously setting us up for a bigger moment later on where Kaido will be shocked to see Momonosuke's human form bearing a striking resemblance to Odin, because as shocked as Kaido would be at seeing Luffy arrive on the roof riding a dragon that looks like himself, that shock factor could only be topped by Kaido witnessing that dragon turn into someone who looks exactly like the man who has engraved his memory into Kaido's mind and body, and that is one awesome idea. Let's start with the most obvious similarity in this segment, which is that the two Dukes transformed into their Sulong forms. This was also the most hyped thing about the segment, with the lead up devoted to both of their forms by showing us just the silhouettes first, which was a beautiful parallel before getting to witness the glory of the Dukes transforming into their Sulong forms, which was very welcome given that the last time we saw this, it was mostly off-screen. And the similar shock this elicited in their respective opponents was just so gratifying to witness. But beyond that, these two also displayed a similar gratitude for the sacrifices of their allies. Two sacrifices, both of which involved explosions, mind you. Inu was able to turn into his Sulong form thanks to Ashura's sacrifice earlier on, which created a hole in the ceiling, which is particularly more meaningful when we consider the squabble we witnessed between Inuarashi and Ashura earlier at Wano. From Ashura initially refusing to join the alliance, to then making a sacrifice which led to saving Inu's life earlier in the raid, and now here, allowing Inu to even the playing field against the hybrid Jack. Similarly with Nekomamushi, who pays his respects to Pedro, whose sacrifice at Totoland was what allowed Luffy and the Straw Hats to escape Big Mom and make it to Wano. And in this way, there is another similarity in that these two fights had a deeper layer where the two Dukes were avenging someone. In Neko's case, obviously avenging Pedro, and for Inu, the whole of Zou. And we actually got another awesome callback moment, seeing Inu grab hold of Jack's trunk to throw him outside. A very familiar scene. My curiosity about Fukurokuju's earlobes continues, with this chapter now showcasing his use of his earlobes to fly, and the two ninjas are now engaged in an aerial battle, seemingly to avoid the fire on the ground. And unless Fukurokuju is aware that beheading Orochi is not enough to kill him, it seems that despite his mockery of the scabbards, both Raizo and Fukurokuju are serving ghost masters. But there aren't so many things to comment on about this segment, because from the dialogue it seems that this segment was used to hype up Momonosuke's matured form. But if there's anything you found, feel free to leave a comment. This chapter also provided some great hype for the antagonists as well. Aside from Jack's hybrid form, we also got hints for further characterization of Kaido's top officers, especially how they both fit in with the lore of One Piece. Continuing from the last chapter, there were further hints about King's race, raising questions about a god's land on top of the Red Line predating Marijois, and the possibility of King belonging to the Lunarian race. And this mention of a race linked to the moon really takes us back to Enel's cover story, where in the cover page for chapter 470, we saw Enel discovering that Skypians, Shandians, and Birkins all originated from the moon. And here, I've interpreted that these figures at the top levels underneath the circular symbol are solar races, being the Shandians, the Skypians, and the Birkins, whereas the dark circular symbol may represent the moon. And interestingly enough, the figures following the moon symbol is mostly hidden from us. And could this have been the Lunarian race? Or given the title of this cover page of Enel studying the ancient Moonanites with wings, perhaps all of these races living on the moon were at some point all collectively referred to as Moonanites, or otherwise known as the Lunarians. King's fighting style came as a bit of a surprise for me, but is something I really enjoy about his character development. His unorthodox fighting style fits Zoro's theme of a unique, self-developed Santorio swordsman. As confirmed by Zoro's dialogue here, both combatants are willing to resort to non-traditional methods to win this battle. King's method of fighting with each part of his body serving as a weapon fits with the concept of him being the torturer, and also serves as a nice parallel to Zoro's fight with Dust Bones, another antagonist whose entire body could be turned into blades. As for Queen, though he may have been tooting up his own horn, his exclamation that his cybernetic tech are even more advanced than Vegapunk's adds a lot of anticipation to see the full extent of his abilities. But the bulk of the intrigue with Queen revolves around his ties to Judge and the work they did together in Mads. The fact that he was the one to bring up the Lunarians, suggesting King's race and possibly Sanji being a modified human, raises questions as to whether Queen had an involvement in Germa 66's experimentation with genetic modification. An interesting detail to note was his dialogue, calling Judge crazy. For someone who creates plagues and diseases, to consider the experimentation on your children crazy raised my intrigue as to Queen's moral standings and values. One similarity that I loved between King and Queen is that they both received a dedicated panel defending an attack from the next duo that we'll discuss. Actually, make that two, because we should also count the panels of the two lying down, perhaps wondering how they ended up on their backs. As the opening segment of the chapter, the focus on this duo felt appropriate to keep up the hype of the previous chapter, whilst also simultaneously hyping up what is coming for the rest of the chapter. And straight away, we got so many similarities pointing to this duo. Even from the very first panel, with the crowd hyping up both Zoro and Sanji whilst they stood over their fallen opponents, was just such an epic opening. The two having very similar expressions of absolute determination on their faces. And their fights against King and Queen had a very familiar vibe. Intentional or not, their fights really remind you of previous arcs. With their opponents being Zoan and dinosaurs, it really reminds you of Little Garden, but this time, instead of competing on who could take down a bigger dinosaur, both have embarked on the task for the same unselfish cause. There's also a callback to Thriller Bark that might have just been foreshadowing the future power-ups for the Straw Hat's strongest fighters. Zoro with the most obvious callback to Ryuma, and him gearing closer to mastering the blade that was exchanged for Ryuma's original sword. Enma was screaming out of the page this chapter. The comparison to Ryuma, who is considered a sword god, implies Zoro is about to reach new heights in his swordsmanship. This scene with Hyogoro and Kawamatsu pointing out the parallels made me think about Yukimaru, who had a closer, more direct relationship to Shimotsuki Ushimaru himself, and yet did not comment on this, which leads me to wonder whether we'll be seeing him again, and maybe sometime soon. Sanji also had a callback to Thriller Bark, and his potential power-up requires more of a look into dialogue and his emotional side, as he screams out that his power-up is the result of his burning passion as opposed to the modification as Queen suggested. This of course can be seen as a callback to Thriller Bark, when Sanji engulfed his entire body with fire as a result of his passion for Nami and anger towards Absalom for putting his hands on the Straw Hat's navigator. If we're talking about power-ups, personally I would like to see a Rankaku type attack with flames shooting out of his foot. And this leads us to discuss the possibility of Sanji's genetic modification, because very similar to the delve into the lore with their respective opponents, we got some hints or some very suggestive comments about each of Zoro and Sanji's backstories. Queen mentioning the Lunarian race sprouted an interesting discussion about the possibility of Sanji being modified with what is heavily suggested to be King's race, which is the reason why he can generate fire. My take on this is that if this is the case, the odd feeling he felt could be explained in a couple of ways, and his words are vague and unclear as to whether the odd feeling is a good or bad thing, but for now, here are some ideas as to what this could lead to. A. This could be hinting at Sanji unleashing his latent potential. Sora taking the drug didn't actually fully suppress Sanji's enhancement, but just delayed it, which now, wearing the raid suit, is gradually drawing out the full extent of his abilities. B. Since Sanji lacks the exoskeleton in contrast to the rest of his siblings, the increased time he spends wearing the raid suit is actually causing a toll on his body. C. If King's Lunarian race and lineage factor is indeed where Sanji's flame ability was drawn from, him being in close proximity to the actual source of his ability early in the raid is what is slowly enhancing his fire generating abilities. Making direct contact with King could have been what triggered this. But a problem with this is that although yes, it was shown that the Germa 66 was able to climb up the red line, this was only something they did recently. And according to the dialogue in this chapter, it suggested that the Lunarian race predates Marijois. So unless the Germa 66 were able to extract some lineage factor or some other remnants of the Lunarian race, this wouldn't really make sense unless they did take it from King personally. And this is pretty cool too, because then we could see Sanji, who has the epithet of Prince, evolving into something of a king. And D, it's also not out of the possibility that this is all just a coincidence and Queen mentioning Sanji's ability was just simply used to reveal King's race. Another idea I have about Sanji's genetic enhancement though is that the way that it works in Sanji's case is that the more emotional he is, the stronger he is as a result of the interplay between Judge's experimentations and Sora's counter-effective drugs. Apart from fitting what we've seen so far in terms of Sanji's fire abilities, it would be an even bigger slap to Judge's face, who always believed Sanji's capacity for emotions was a limitation to his strength, but actually it will be the source of Sanji's greater strength. And the reason I say this is because apart from the fact I would love to see Sanji get a power up, my personal thoughts on this whole Sanji modification is that whilst I wouldn't dislike it if his genetic modifications came into play, I do prefer Sanji's fire abilities being left scientifically unexplained and just being the results of Sanji's passions as a human. Similar to my thoughts on Zoro's potential lineage. Whilst I like seeing the resemblance to other renowned figures and would like to see a greater backstory, I wouldn't want it to be a complete reincarnation of an important being. Similar to how I feel about Luffy and Joy Boy or to his Gomu Gomu fruit. Because I really like the characters' individualities and I like that they each really work to get to where they are. And I'm not saying that their connections to the events or figures in the past has to undermine their achievements, because I do believe that if anyone is best suited to tell this story and explore all of these connections, then it's Oda. And if you want my thoughts about Zoro's strongly suggested but yet to be confirmed link to the Shimotskis, then please check out this video. Now as for the cover page, if you guys have been following our reviews for a while, then you'll know about my fear of birds. And seeing Vivi just chilling with birds on her arms creeps me out, but good on her for living out the Disney princess trope. The positive tone of this cover page at least paints a happier image of Vivi's fate than was last suggested during the reverie, though this may not mean anything as it is just a fan request. The color spread, or at least part 1 of the color spread of the top 50 One Piece characters from the global poll is so exciting. I cannot wait to see the whole thing completed, and I'm hoping I'll be able to get myself a print. It seems we've got a snippet of Sanji's flame leg peeking out at the right, so I'll be looking forward to seeing that next week. Because there is no break next week, which is truly amazing considering all we got in this chapter. And if you don't want to miss out on my review of chapter 1024 or on any of my other One Piece discussions throughout the week, then please make sure to subscribe. Leave a comment below on your thoughts for the chapter as well as your tally for the similarity pairs you could find in the chapter. So this chapter title was not only a reference to Zoro's resemblance to Ryuma, it wasn't even a title that just contained a double meaning, and I can't wait to read about the ones you found. If you enjoyed marveling about the artwork submitted in our competition, please do join our Joyfleet Discord server where you may even like to submit your own talent like these wonderful artists. And if you would like to vote on who gets to be featured as winner, then please note that becoming a patron will grant you these special Discord powers. On that note, thank you to all our patrons who help support our channel. This is JoyGirl, and I'll see you again soon.